Rachel and Daniel Mayers were the kind of couple neighbors admired, 2 kids, a charming home, and years of marriage behind them. But when Rachel filed for divorce, the illusion shattered. Within days, she was lying dead in her driveway, gunned down in cold blood. Daniel vanished without a trace, leaving behind a trail of deception, a fake grave, and a nation on edge. What began as a quiet cry for freedom became one of the most chilling manhunts in recent true crime history. Rachel Mayers lived in a peaceful, tree-lined neighborhood on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon. Her home, with its white picket fence and freshly painted shutters, looked like something out of a magazine. People in the community admired her. She was a devoted mother of 2, attended school events, and was always quick with a warm smile. To outsiders, Rachel's life seemed picture perfect. But behind her calm demeanor was a woman slowly drowning in silence. 4 years, Rachel had been stuck in a marriage that felt more like a cage than a commitment. Her husband, Daniel Mayers, had changed. In the early days of their marriage, he had been charming and ambitious, someone she believed would protect and love her forever. But as time passed, his charm gave way to coldness. He became controlling, first with money, then with where she went, and eventually with who she could speak to. Friends she had once confided in drifted away. Whether out of fear or embarrassment, Rachel stopped opening up. She became more isolated with each passing year. Daniel never raised his hand to her, but his words cut deeply. He would belittle her, accuse her of infidelity without cause, and question her every move. It was a slow erosion of confidence that Rachel barely noticed until it was too late. Even the children sensed the tension. Their once happy home had become a place of whispered arguments and forced smiles at dinner point. One afternoon, Rachel stood at the kitchen sink staring out the window. Her hands moved automatically over the dishes, but her mind was racing. She couldn't remember the last time she felt truly safe, truly loved. Something inside her shifted. She picked up her phone and searched how to leave a controlling spouse. That small act would set in motion a series of irreversible events. Over the next few months, Rachel quietly gathered important documents, birth certificates, bank statements, copies of passwords. She opened a private bank account, using an old friend's address as the mailing location. She contacted a divorce attorney and explained everything. The lawyer warned her to be cautious, to not alert Daniel until everything was in place. Rachel nodded. She understood the risk. Still, she didn't expect what would come. Daniel had grown suspicious. He noticed the changes, how she took more phone calls in private, how she stopped asking for money, how she avoided his gaze. One night, she found him going through her purse. When she asked him what he was doing, he simply said, "Making sure you're not lying to me." That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake listening to his breathing, wondering how someone she once trusted had become a stranger lying beside her. Rachel knew her time was running out. She made a final plan, one that involved filing for divorce, securing a temporary protective order, and moving out with the children. What she didn't know was that Daniel had already made a plan of his own. One that didn't include letting her go. On the morning of March 8, 2022, Rachel finally took the step she had been preparing for over several nerve-wracking weeks. With her attorney's help, the divorce papers were officially filed and served to Daniel while he was at work. She chose that moment carefully, hoping that being in a public place would prevent any immediate outburst. Daniel received the envelope, opened it briefly, and, without saying a word, left the office building. That was the last time anyone at his job saw him. Rachel waited anxiously at home, unsure of what would happen next. The hours ticked by and Daniel didn't return. At first, she was relieved. She thought maybe he'd left in shock, maybe even accepted it silently. But by nightfall, concern began to creep in. She tried calling his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She didn't know whether to feel safe or more afraid. His sudden disappearance was uncharacteristic. Daniel wasn't the type to retreat. He was the type to retaliate. The next morning, Rachel went to the police station and filed a report explaining the situation and her husband's vanishing act. Officers told her that since there was no sign of a crime and he was an adult, there wasn't much they could do. Rachel pressed for a temporary protective order anyway, which was granted based on her recent filings and her claims of emotional abuse. Over the next few days, Rachel remained on edge. She kept her phone close, double-checked the locks, and made sure her kids stayed inside after school. The house no longer felt like a home, it was a fortress under siege. Daniel's social media accounts went dark. His phone remained off. The joint bank account had been drained of nearly $7,000, and his car was no longer parked in the usual spot at his friend's auto shop. It was like he had vanished into thin air. What Rachel didn't know was that Daniel hadn't disappeared out of fear. He was watching from a distance, calculating. He knew the legal system would slow things down. He had time. He moved between motels using cash, picked up a burner phone, and stopped using anything traceable. Every move Rachel made was something he expected. He knew her patterns better than anyone: the route she took to school with the kids, the coffee shop she visited once a week, the grocery store she always stopped at on Sundays. Meanwhile, Rachel was trying to build a new life from the ashes of a broken one. She met with counselors, arranged for custody paperwork, and began packing items discreetly. The kids sensed something was off, but she reassured them with half-truths and forced optimism. She believed that by taking control, she was protecting them, but Daniel had no intention of surrendering control. The silence wasn't peace, it was a warning. He wasn't finished. As Rachel began to feel a glimmer of hope that her new life might be possible, Daniel was getting ready to ensure that if he couldn't have her, no one could. March 22, 2022, began like any ordinary spring morning in the mayor's neighborhood. The sun was rising slowly, casting soft light across the quiet street. Birds chirped from the trees, and the world outside seemed calm. Inside her home, Rachel moved through her morning routine carefully, as though each step required deliberate courage. She had started taking the kids to school herself lately, wanting to keep them close, to feel in control of whatever she could. She stood in the kitchen packing their lunches while her children ate cereal at the table. Her eyes frequently darted toward the window, scanning the front yard, though there was nothing unusual to see. The protection order had offered her a small sense of security, but Daniel's absence only made her more uneasy. It wasn't like him to stay quiet for this long. And deep inside, Rachel sensed that something was coming. At 7:45 a.m., she loaded the kids into the car. Her son sat in the backseat scrolling through his phone, her daughter chatting about a school project. Rachel smiled and nodded, trying to hide her unease. She didn't know that Daniel had already been in the area for over an hour, parked a few blocks away in a rented vehicle under a fake name. He'd watched the house through binoculars, memorizing every movement. When Rachel pulled out of the driveway, he followed at a distance, unnoticed. She dropped the kids off safely at school, hugged them tight, and told them she'd be back by 3. On the drive home, she began to feel something she hadn't in weeks: relief. There was a peace that came with surviving another day, another step forward. At 8:30 a.m., Rachel returned home and parked the car in the driveway. As she stepped out with her purse slung over her shoulder, the calm morning was shattered. A figure emerged from behind the hedges, raising a gun. There was no warning, no sound but the quick pop-pop-pop of gunfire. Rachel was struck multiple times. She tried to crawl toward the porch, her hand outstretched, but she collapsed before she could reach the steps. A neighbor's door slammed open at the sound. A man ran out, phone in hand, yelling for help. Rachel's teenage son, who had stayed homesick, heard the shots from his bedroom. He looked out the window and saw his mother lying in the driveway, unmoving. His scream pierced the air as he dialed 911. By the time paramedics arrived, Rachel had already lost too much blood. Her injuries were too severe. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The neighborhood was cordoned off, police tape fluttering in the wind. Officers scoured the area but found no sign of the shooter. Witnesses reported seeing a man in dark clothes fleeing through the backyard and jumping a fence. The security camera footage confirmed what investigators feared: it was Daniel. He had come back, planned the attack, and vanished once again. The manhunt was officially underway, and the quiet Oregon neighborhood was left shaken by the brutal killing of a woman who had only wanted a chance to live free. In the days following Rachel's murder, the community reeled with shock. Memorial flowers piled up outside the mayor's home. News reports called it a domestic tragedy, but for investigators, it was far from over. Daniel Mayers was on the run, and the manhunt to capture him grew more intense with each passing hour. Detectives quickly traced his last known steps. Surveillance cameras confirmed that Daniel had used a rented vehicle, which was later found abandoned near a dense forest preserve almost 70 miles from Portland. Inside the vehicle, they found a note on the passenger seat written in Daniel's handwriting. It read, "She destroyed everything. I'm not going to jail." That was the first and only communication he had left behind. The car contained no phone, no credit cards, and no traceable belongings. Police feared he had gone completely off-grid. Local authorities, search and rescue teams, and even canine units combed the surrounding woods, but the terrain was rough, and after several days, there was no sign of him. For weeks, it seemed like Daniel had vanished into the earth. Then, a shocking twist came. 3 months after the murder, a group of hikers discovered a shallow grave in a wooded area north of the original search zone. They called the authorities immediately, believing they might have found Daniel's remains. The grave was poorly concealed, and inside it was a decomposing body in tattered clothes, similar to what Daniel had been last seen wearing. Alongside the body was a burned wallet containing Daniel's old ID. At first glance, it appeared the killer had taken his own life, a tragic ending to a horrific story. The media ran with it. News headlines read, "Fugitive husband found dead in forest." Rachel's family breathed a complicated sigh of relief. But just days later, forensic testing shattered that belief. Dental records revealed the body was not Daniel Mayers. It belonged to a local homeless man named Tony Carver, who had been reported missing just days after Rachel's death. Carver had a history of mental illness and frequently wandered the woods. His body had been redressed in Daniel's clothes, and the ID had been planted. It was an elaborate misdirection. Investigators now understood they were dealing with someone far more calculated than they had assumed. Daniel hadn't snapped in a moment of rage, he had planned every step. The grave had been a decoy, a deliberate effort to throw law enforcement off his trail. The fake suicide note in the car, the planted body, and the burned ID were all carefully staged. Digging deeper, authorities examined Daniel's past relationships. One name stood out: Amanda Fields, his high school girlfriend. She had no criminal record but had been involved in a string of failed businesses, each ending with bankruptcy and rumors of fraud. Investigators discovered that Amanda had recently liquidated several assets, closed her social media accounts, and disappeared from her small Idaho town around the same time Daniel vanished. Now, police believed Daniel had help. The murder had never been about rage alone. It was about control, escape, and the chilling belief that he could outsmart justice. The final break in the case came after a quiet tip from a store clerk in rural Idaho. The woman said she had seen a man matching Daniel's description weeks earlier, buying supplies with cash and keeping his head low. He wasn't alone. With him was a woman who seemed overly cautious, rarely speaking, and paying in exact change. The clerk remembered the couple because they wore gloves in warm weather and never made eye contact. When detectives followed up, they learned the store's security cameras had been recently wiped. It only deepened their suspicions. Using satellite data and nearby traffic cameras, investigators triangulated the area and located a small off-the-grid cabin hidden in the woods about 20 miles from the store. It had no official records, no utilities registered, and could only be accessed through an unmarked dirt road. A team of federal marshals was deployed, moving in quietly under the cover of early morning fog. What they found confirmed every fear. Inside the cabin, they discovered Daniel Mayers, gaunt, bearded, and unarmed, along with Amanda Fields. The cabin was stocked with months' worth of food, cash in sealed bags, and multiple fake IDs. They had no internet, no phones, and no devices that could connect them to the outside world. Every trace of their location had been scrubbed clean. Daniel didn't resist arrest. When officers cuffed him, he showed no emotion, no panic, not even surprise. Amanda cried as they led her outside, but Daniel simply stared at the tree line, as if he still believed he'd had a chance to disappear forever. In the days following his arrest, a clearer picture emerged. Amanda had helped Daniel flee days before Rachel's murder. She had driven across state lines, used her contacts to secure the cabin, and even practiced the story they'd use if caught. They believed they could vanish, that with no digital trail, no cell phone, and no communication, they'd be untraceable. And for a while, they were. Investigators also found chilling evidence inside the cabin, a detailed journal outlining Daniel's resentment toward Rachel, his obsessive control, and his belief that she had betrayed him by choosing freedom. He didn't see it as murder. In his mind, it was punishment. During the trial, the prosecution painted Daniel as manipulative, cold, and unremorseful. They presented surveillance footage, the forged grave site, and Amanda's full confession. Amanda testified that Daniel had convinced her it was the only way for them to be together, that Rachel was a threat to his life. The jury didn't buy it. After 2 weeks of testimony and overwhelming evidence, Daniel Mayers was found guilty of first-degree murder, conspiracy, and evading arrest. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Amanda received a reduced sentence for her cooperation. Rachel's children, now living with their grandparents, never saw their father again. Her story became a painful reminder of how control, when left unchecked, can evolve into violence, and how even in freedom, danger can still be hiding just out of sight.